Thank you, brother. It's certainly a blessing for me to be with you today. And I want to share with you something about hope and heaven. That's what I'm going to speak about, hope and heaven. Hope, that's me. My mother told me since I was a child to never give up hope. And heaven is where my beloved wife is. That's where I hope to be with her, and all of us will go there. So it is hope and heaven. It's a story of life, love, and leadership. And also about what you can do to be of service to others. As you heard, I was born in Cambodia. That is the other way around the world, half the world away. And by the way, thank you very much for your service in the Vietnam War in the U.S. Navy. You have served country and serving God. And in my belief, there is nothing more important than serving God and country. And you are doing both. God bless you. So I was born less than a mile from this terminal. Too bad you never made it to Cambodia because you were always in the ship. So less than a mile from this terminal, and you recognize my wife Martha. I think David and Irma recognize her. I was born when Cambodia was under French rule. So France was the mother country. Everything was for France, of France, and from France. I grew up speaking French, eating French food, which is not bad. And until 1953, when Vice President and Mrs. Nixon came to visit, our teachers told us that there was another country, much bigger and farther away than France. It's called United States of America. That was the first time I heard about America. My father was a police chief, but he died when I was 9 years old. So my mother brought me up, and she worked very hard. She knew that education was important, so she worked very hard. At one point, she had to sell lotus leaves. Lotus leaves were used in poor countries like in Cambodia in the 50s and 60s to wrap produce that people bought in the morning because we didn't have any refrigerator. So you went to the market every morning and you bought all the things you need for that particular day. And everything was wrapped in lotus leaves. So as I told you a moment ago, she taught me from my young age to never give up hope. Never give up hope. As you know, hope is the anchor, right? The anchor of hope. And that's how I spell hope. Honesty, optimism, perseverance, and extraordinariness. So never give up hope no matter what happens. In the 60s, at the late 60s, I was working as a flight attendant in the airlines, Cambodian Airlines, and we flew all over Asia. We went to China at the peak of the Cultural Revolution. What I saw in China was unbelievable. And I never knew that a few years later, that revolution would reach my homeland. You all saw what happened in Kabul on August 15 and the following days, and that brought me back the memories of my own evacuation. President Ford gave an address to the joint session of Congress. He said, for this administration, the time is short and the options are few. 2 days later, I was told, there was no cell phone, there was no social media, there was nothing. And I was told that if I want to be airlifted out of Cambodia, I must be at the embassy within an hour. And I was not a U.S. citizen. I was just a local employee of an American organization. I worked in dangerous circumstances, trying to save the lives of many hundreds and thousands of people who fled the war-torn countryside to seek safety and shelter in the provincial cities or in the capital. So the Americans knew that my life would be in danger if I was left behind. And they told us like 10 days earlier that if the time comes, you have only 1 hour to get to the embassy. That morning, 2 days after President Ford gave the address, 7 o'clock, a person, an employee of the U.S. Embassy came to me and said, you have to be at the embassy within 1 hour. But I made a mistake. I don't know whether it was a mistake or it's a blessing. I had a meeting with the governor of a province where we helped care for some 3,000 refugee families. And they were stranded there because the road had been cut by the Khmer Rouge, by the Viet Cong, by the North Vietnamese. And I thought that by going to the meeting with the governor to plan the delivery of food and medical supplies, I would be able to save the lives of those stranded people. I thought that I would be able to save their lives and also would be able to leave the country with a clear conscience. When I came to the embassy, I was told that the last helicopter had taken off 30 minutes before. So I was stuck there, and 5 days later, the Khmer Rouge came in. You heard the Khmer Rouge, the killing fields. They came in and they turned the country upside down. They killed anybody who wore glasses. It's a sign of education. They killed nurses, doctors, military personnel, teachers, anybody who had not been with them during the so-called revolution. So my mother gave me her wedding ring, her scarf, and a bag of rice. She told me to run. No matter what happens, never give up hope. So hope kept me alive in some of the most difficult circumstances. I was captured near Thailand after riding my bike for 3 weeks crossing Cambodia, using fake passes and false excuses to get through the checkpoints. They were going to kill me that night because they suspected I was trying to cross the border to Thailand, which was actually my intention. But a truck driver whom I had met a few days before saved my life. He told the Khmer Rouge I was an innocent person, wandering around looking for my family. So for the next year, I was put in forced labor camps. We were forced to work 18 hours a day. We were given a bowl of rancid soup a day to eat. At night, when I went to sleep, I never knew if I would be alive the following morning. When I woke up, I said I would make it to freedom. On February the 13th, 1976, I was alone at the back of the timber truck, which looked like this one. But I could not jump to the left because the Khmer Rouge, the driver, would have seen me through the rearview mirror. I couldn't jump to the right. The Khmer Rouge soldier with an AK-47 would have seen me. What I did was to crawl on top of the timber all the way to the back, and I just dropped myself. As you can see, it's very high. So I was tumbling down. I was caught in a piece of lumber, and I was dragged for a few hundred yards before I was flung off. And I began to run, to walk, to crawl, swim for 3 days, having nothing to eat or to drink, and nothing to guide me except the sun, the stars, and the moon. I fell in a booby trap. I was severely wounded. It's a deep hole full of punchy sticks, sharp bamboo sticks. They were supposed to catch the unlucky victims at the stomach or the heart, but I'm tall for Cambodia. So they hit me at my legs. I still had scars on my legs. But I was able to pull myself out and began to limp along until I got to Thailand, where I was jailed. Then they realized that I was an innocent refugee, so they sent me to a refugee camp. This is the size of a soccer field with some 3,000 refugee families living in a very unhealthy condition, filthy, humid, hot. They suffered severe mental depression because they sat around all day feeling sorry about the past and worrying about the future. I thought I would do something to help them out, so I organized English classes. It was a win-win proposal because many of them were going to an English-speaking country, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, the United States. So they were able to get some basic English, and at the same time they were able to take their minds off the sorrows and the worries. On June 4th, 1976, I arrived in Wallingford, Connecticut, with my mother's scarf, an empty rice bag, and $2. I was sponsored by a family. In the 70s, refugees had to be sponsored by a church, by organizations, or by families. And I was sponsored by a family in Wallingford, Connecticut. It's halfway between Hartford and New Haven. They didn't know me, I didn't know them. It was out of the goodness of their heart that they brought me in. So that was Matthew 25:35. That is my favorite verse. I was a stranger, and you took me in. So I was sick and tired, exhausted, but I was full of hope. I wanted to be on my own feet. I wanted to be self-sufficient as soon as possible. So I picked apples. In Connecticut, I ate a lot of apples, enough to last for a lifetime. Then I went to New York to become a taxi driver. In order to be a taxi driver in New York, you had to take a test. It's all about directions. How do you get from Madison Square Garden to Yankee Stadium, for example? I had no idea where these places were. So I just checked the boxes. At the end, I brought a sheet to the examiner. He looked at the sheet, at the boxes. He looked at me from head to toe. He shook his head. He said, "You passed." So I became a taxi driver. That says a lot about taxi drivers, right? In 1977, you didn't need to know where you were going to drive a taxi in New York. You needed strong horn and good brakes. And I was amazed that New Yorkers could communicate in sign language. And sometimes with just one finger. So I did everything that came my way to the best of my ability. I got a scholarship from Columbia University. I did a Master of International Affairs. And I worked on various organizations, including Wall Street and many churches, including Lutheran and Episcopal churches, and helping people who are trying to get to the United States to start new lives. So by the grace of God, they were able to come here legally and start new lives. And along the way, I met a wonderful woman from Pampa, Texas. How many of you know where Pampa, Texas is? All right, very good. Good travelers. For the benefit of everyone, Pampa is 60 miles northeast of Amarillo, in the Panhandle. They say you don't go there unless you have to. And there's nothing between Pampa and the North Pole, except a barbed wire fence and 2 strands are down. But I met this wonderful woman from Pampa named Martha Patillo Siv at this location. It's just in the same block as the Trump World Tower on 47 and 2nd. Then my life changed. She grew up as Presbyterian in Pampa, Texas. She brought me there. In fact, I came to Texas the first time in 1982. Remember where you were in 1982? So our friendship turned into romance into a very happy marriage. On Christmas Eve 1983, Pampa was one of the 2 coldest spots in the United States. 7 degrees below. 12 inches of snow on the ground. The wind was blowing 20 miles per hour. And Martha was joking. That was when they get married. They were married on Christmas Eve, 1983. Martha was joking that if I were going through this, I must be serious. So in the 80s, we were introduced to Reagan. And then we start receiving invitation from the White House. One was July 13, 1988. That was the first time I met George H.W. Bush, Vice President of the United States. And that's when I began to volunteer. In fact, I volunteered before I met him because I wanted to understand how American politics work. So I volunteered in his campaign. In 1976, if you remember, there was an election, the year that I arrived, between Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. I watched TV with all these conventions, delegates, and I didn't understand what was going on. There were people wearing funny hats, jumping up and down the chair, shouting, screaming. Not you, but they really wore any hat, elephant or donkeys or whatever. And I did not understand, so I asked my host family, what is it? They said to me that this is a convention. These are delegates. They're going to choose 2 people, and they're going to elect one of them to be the next president of the United States. And they said that, Sichan, if you want to understand this country, you get involved. You'll get involved. So my chance to get involved was in 1988. When I was standing there with the Vice President and President of the United States, the thought never crossed my mind that a few months later, I would be working at the White House. So January 20th, 1989, George Bush put his left hand on 2 Bibles. 2 Bibles. One was used by George Washington on April 30th, 1789, 200 years earlier. And the other one belonged to his family. So because there was 200 years from George Washington to George Bush, we call it the bicentennial of presidential inauguration, from George to George. He raised his right hand and he repeated after Chief Justice Rehnquist, I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and that I will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. So help me God. Those are the words that were added by George Washington 200 years earlier. He lowered his right hand and became 41st President of the United States. In his inaugural address, George Bush offered a prayer. He was the first, and I think he still remained the only president who offered a prayer in his inaugural address. So there I was on February 13, 1989, I walked into work at the White House. 13 years from the day I was severely injured in the jungle of Cambodia. That I made it that far in such a short time could happen only in America. And that a great tribute to George Bush and to our great country. So there I was on the left when I was in the refugee camp, malnourished, famished, and didn't know where I was going. And 13 years later, I was an assistant to the President of the United States. Working at the White House was very special. For me, it's even more special because of my background. But being in the Oval Office with the President was quite overwhelming. And being alone with the President was simply unbelievable. Under Bush, if you remember, the world changed. The Cold War ended. Eastern Europe became free. The Soviet Union fell apart. Germany became united. And there I was sitting there, seeing history taking shape in front of my eyes. Only 13 years after I was running for my life. 2001, George W. Bush sent me to the United Nations to represent our country. And that was another special place, special moment. Each time I walk in, my colleagues from 192 countries looked at me and they saw you. They saw America, her strength and her greatness. Each time I pronounced on behalf of the President and people of the United States. That was my proudest moment. So I was blessed to work for two presidents named Bush, and I like to say I worked behind the bushes. And all of this is summarized in a book called Golden Bones. Golden Bones are terms Cambodians use to refer to somebody who is very blessed. Anybody who is very blessed. They call it a person of golden bone. I think all of us are people of golden bone because we are blessed. We are blessed to be in America, even more blessed to be in Texas, right? George Bush once said, "I am an American and a Texan. What more can I ask?" And I used the same thing when I went to the Texas Senate to be confirmed to serve on the Texas Board of Criminal Justice. So this mural is in College Station at the George Bush Library. If you haven't done it yet, I encourage you to visit it when it's open again. Duty, honor, country. And that's Martha and me, and that's my favorite verse. I was a stranger and took me in. December 3rd, 2018, this is probably the highlight of my career in a sense, because I was told in October that the President Bush, George H.W. Bush, his health was declining. So in October, I got a memo from his chief of staff. She sent it to 5 of us who are not family members. We are the only 5 non-family members to be invited to fly on Air Force One. She said that if the President died, or when the President died, you are invited to accompany his body to Washington. And that's, you cannot imagine how overwhelmingly honored I am, because I was not even born in the United States. I've known him only for 30 years. That's a long time, but there are people who have known him more than that. So she said that day 1 he died, day 3 Air Force One comes to Houston, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, blah, blah, blah. Everything was very precise. It's a military operation. In case you do not know, the funeral, President's funeral is very, very well planned out. The newly elected president, one of the first meetings he meets would be on his funeral, how to plan it. And George Bush had, the longer the president lives, I think Jimmy Carter is now the longest living president. The longer a president lives, the funeral plan is revised every 5 years. And we had a good dry run when Mrs. Bush passed away in April, on April 17, 2018. So it was a dry run for us. So a few months later, on November 30th, he left to join his beloved wife, Barbara. So December 13, I was on a plane with 4 of my colleagues who are non-family members, and that's how I felt. And I remember this, another favorite verse of mine, 1 Corinthians 13a, you know, love never ends. And the enormous emotion on that flight inspired me to write a poem. That was the only poem I ever wrote on Air Force One. So there we are in Andrews. Just precisely, the memo said 3:30 we arrived at Andrews. At 3:30 we arrived at Andrews. The 3 of us. Congressional funeral. I wrote this poem. You see the three pictures on top. There were 4 of us, and then 3, and then 1. So the poem reads, I don't know if you can see it, but I read for you. Once we were 4 with a Christmas tree. Then we were 3 by a shining sea. Now I'm alone, but not lonely, for God is with us. with you and me. Soon we'll be together, free, together forever through eternity. So 4, 3, 1. The one on the right, top right, that's their house in Kennebunkport. It's by the Shining Sea. The first one was at the White House, and the one on the bottom one was me alone. So that's what my life before. I forgot to mention, I did mention that Martha is in heaven with the Lord. And December 2016, or in fact the entire year 2016 was to me was sort of anno horribilis, a horrible year. Because Martha's health began to decline in June. And on December 4th, we were talking about baptism on this. Despite all these years, I've spent more time in the church with Martha than in a Buddhist temple. So my transition to Christianity was quite gradual, especially when I was working for the churches in New York. So on December 4th, I decided to be baptized at the First Presbyterian Church of San Antonio. And Martha told me that was my best gift to her. And I told Ron Skate, my senior pastor who baptized me, I told him that it was his best gift to me. So what is life after loss? All of us, unfortunately, has to face grief one way or another. You mentioned you lost a member of the church, so we are all grieving. The best way to get our grief is to go to grief, which is quite a challenge, right? For me, it's quite even more challenging because Martha was the only child. We have no children. I was the only person. So when we met, we became one. So the burden of grief has been on me alone. So what did I do is after she left me to be in heaven with the Lord, I just immersed myself in studying everything. I read the Bible very fast, and I listened to it in Spanish or in French, and I kept myself busy. That's what my grief pastor told me. Because all of us here, we have a temporary tent, right? We want to have an eternal house, and that's what it says here. It says 2 Corinthians. This verse, by the way, was read at the funeral of Mrs. Bush, Barbara Bush. It was read by Barbara Bush, the granddaughter. So the Barbara Bush, the granddaughter, read this verse at the funeral of her grandmother. Eternal house, that's where we want to be. So I always ask, what is it that I can do to serve others? Every morning when I get up, that was my question. How can I bring a smile to 5 people today? To the cashier at HEB, to the post office worker, to the gas station attendant. If I can bring a smile to 5 people, that's a good day for me. And also learn something new. And I always ask, because I'm just curious. I'm just curious about things. So ask, and it will be answered. Seek, you'll find, and knock, will be opened. This is the office of George Bush. Actually, I stood there at his desk in Houston. That's where he worked before he was not able to go to work anymore. So I went to the Holy Land. I went to the Holy Land with my senior pastor, and it was another eye-opening experience for me. I studied a lot, I learned a lot, and now I was in that place where I could relate to. Nazareth, Galilee, Bethlehem, and the baptism site. That's where Jesus was baptized. It's almost all dry, and it's actually it's on the Jordanian side of the river. I try to be a light on somebody's life let the light shine. Even in the darkness, I was thinking about when we went through this freeze in February. No, there was no light, there was nothing, and we had our Bible study through Zoom, and the pastor went around asking for everyone. I said, the light shine in the darkness. Yeah, I don't have electricity, but I have candles. Now, if I want to do something, I have to do it now. Don't wait until tomorrow. And that's one of the most important words I learned in the Bible. Do it now, do this now. Don't wait until tomorrow. So what did I do? You saw about Afghan, and when I was sworn in on November 10, 2001, in fact, the UN General Assembly was scheduled to open on September 11, 2001. So the terrorist attack at the World Trade Center, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon, we postponed the opening to November 10. I was sworn in that morning in front of the U.S. flag and the President flag. Why President flag? Because George W. Bush was going to come to the mission to greet the mission staff. So I was honored to be sworn in front of both flags. The minute I put my right hand down, it was Afghanistan, Afghanistan, Afghanistan for 6 months. And then we had Iraq, Iraq, Iraq. So I was able to go to Baghdad the first time in 2004, in the middle of the war. That's my picture on the left. The right one is a church in Baghdad, First Presbyterian Church, which I visit, and I went to Basra and Kirkuk. The one on the left is in Basra, the right one on the right is in Kirkuk. And then I interact here at home. I interacted a lot with our military. This is Travis Air Force Base. Those of you who serve in Vietnam probably have gone to Travis. Travis is the base for the largest plane, you know, the C-5, the C-17, where you saw them airlifting people from Kabul, and the KC-10 tankers. And this is in Charleston. Charleston is another C-17 base, one of the two largest C-17 bases in the United States, along with the Lewis McCord in Tacoma, Washington. So it's an honor for me to interact with our military, and this is the Texas Board of Criminal Justice, where I sit on the board. They are the people who keep us safe, who make sure that the victims are assisted, but more importantly, is to be able to reintegrate those who made the wrong turns in their lives into the society by giving skills and training to be contributing members of our society. And I always believe that we can do a lot, but it's up to God, to the good Lord, that make the final battle plan successful. We are always prepared, but it's up to God. This is a church in Germany. It's in Aachen. I don't know whether you know, you've been there, Irma. That's another. I have too many favorite verses, so I could spend all day, but this is one of the favorite ones. Here, it's in San Antonio. I don't know if you've seen this picture. One you have the church, and the other one you have the library. And those who think they know something do not yet know what they ought to know. So you have all these people in Washington who think that they know, but they really do not know. They do not know. Oh my goodness. Okay. I am usually a hero who acts, so I'm safe in this verse. I don't want a hero who does nothing, but I'm a hero who acts. James 1:25. Can you see, Emma? Yeah. So we are all fellow citizens. We are all living in the kingdom of God. And we are all going to be together again in the near future. That's what I told you, that a good day for me is when I can bring a smile to 5 people and learn something new. So I want to dedicate this presentation, this testimony to Martha, who is in heaven the Lord, and that is Hope and Heaven, a painting done by an artist in Dumas, Texas. You probably know Dumas, Texas if you go to Colorado, because you always go through Dumas. Hope and Heaven. Thank you very much. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States. Amen. Thank you. Can you guys iterate a little bit? Oh, yes. Okay. All right. I want to repeat the question that Dave asked. Cambodia, just like many countries in Southeast Asia, are predominantly Buddhist. Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, all the way to Bangladesh, all the way to India. India, many people think that it's a Hindu country, but there are a lot of Buddhists there. And down to Sri Lanka. They stop right there because the Maldives is mostly a Muslim country. So I was born a Buddhist, and my mother was a devout Buddhist. And that she told me to never give up hope. And I never knew that hope was the anchor in Christianity, or the anchor of hope. So when I escaped from the killing fields of Cambodia, the refugee camp where I told you about when I was teaching English was across the street from a Buddhist temple. So I was ordained a Buddhist monk at one point, because Buddhists believe that when you become a monk, you earn merit. You earn deeds, and you can dedicate those merits and deeds to your loved ones. And I did that for my mother and my brother, my sister, and their children, 15 of them, who were brutally murdered by the Khmer Rouge. All of them were killed. I didn't know until 5 years later, when I got a letter from a childhood friend saying that he went to the village and he was told by the villagers that all of my family was killed. But one of the things I learned from George Bush, not just about leadership, but how to be a complete person. You go to the Bush Library, you walk in, you see faith, family, friends. Those are the 3 most important elements in your life. What can you do without these? You ask a question. Faith, family, friends. So the 3 people who are most influential in my life, 2 of them are women. My mother, who gave me life, Martha, who gave me love, and George Bush, who taught me about leadership and how to be of service to others. He said in 1989, any definition of a successful life must include service to others. So I sort of paraphrased that, and I came up with this. Especially for young people, when I speak to young people, I usually leave a message. This message is for the children and grandchildren. Be well, be wise, be worthy. Be flexible and able to adapt to difficult circumstances. Follow your passion. When you do well, don't forget to do good. You don't have to wait until you do well, but you can do well, especially when you do good. Martha and I spoke to a group of students at Yale, and that was the question they asked. They asked, what message do you want to leave us? And I said, never give up hope. And some of them read the books, and they said, that's your mother's message. We want you to hear. We want you to tell us, what is your message? And I thought for a few seconds, and I came up with this. A week later, Martha and I were in University of El Paso, University of Texas in El Paso. And I got a call from the Yale Record, which is the oldest college newspaper in the country. They said that we are going to write a story about your visit here, but we want to get the exact quote. Did you say, be well, be wise, be wealthy? I said, no, there's nothing wrong about being wealthy, but I said, be well, be wise, be worthy. So they wrote that, they put it on the front page. They sent me a copy. I cut it out and I sent to my boss, George H.W. Bush, who was a Yalee, he was a baseball captain at Yale. And he was very happy. That was a good job, well done. So my Buddhist experience also helped me in a sense in my transition to Christianity. I gave a speech in Cozumel at a church in Cozumel in 2018, and one of the elders asked me, when you were running through the jungle, what is it that sustained you? And I said, well, my mother told me to never give up hope, probably hope most of all sustained me, that there must be a divine intervention. And then he told me later, God knew you before you were born. Yeah, God knew you since the foundation of time. And I said, so God has a plan for me all along. One of the toughest questions was to me, because I give a lot of speeches, was what happened if you do not miss that helicopter? And I don't know how to answer the question, because what happened if I don't miss the helicopter? I may go to France. I may be somewhere else. But the better question, which is similar to that one, what would be the perfect world for you if you were to live it again? And I said, it's a world with Martha and George Bush. Yeah. So here I am with you, and that's a blessing. And thank you so much for the blessing of your company.